TINTERN ABBEY. Before I start with the text, I'm going to look at and briefly give you a background of the poem. Wordsworth himself described this experience of composing this poem, so I'm going to start with his own words in which he describes the whole process and the experience of writing this poem. I'm going to read out his actual words. He said, "No poem of mine was composed under circumstances more pleasant for me to remember than this. I began it upon leaving Tintern, after crossing the Wye, and concluded it just as I was entering Bristol in the evening, after a ramble of 4 or 5 days with my sister. Not a line of it was altered, and not any part of it was written down till I reached Bristol. It was published almost immediately after in a little volume of which so much has been said in these notes." Wordsworth mentions some very important things here. He says that he started composing the poem immediately after he left this place called Tintern. Abbey is a church. It's a small church. So the poem is named after the small church and the place called Tintern, although Wordsworth does not talk about it, does not talk about the abbey in the poem. He does talk about Wye, which is the river that is that crosses those woods. So he says he began composing the poem right after he left that place, and he says he concluded it after he was he was entering Bristol after a lapse of 4 or 5 days. So the poem was composed in 4 or 5 days during his visit, during his travel journey back to Bristol. And then he mentions to you that he was not alone. He was with his sister, Dorothy was her name. The important thing is I have highlighted for you here. He says not a line of it was altered. He did not change what he had composed. And then not any part of it was written down till I reached Bristol. And it was all in his memory. He had not written it down. He wrote it down once he reached Bristol. So, and then he says, I got it published almost immediately in a little volume. And this is a reference to the lyrical ballads. And remember, I told you that lyrical ballads was the first collection of poems published jointly by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And this poem was the last poem in that volume. Now let's look at more, in detail about some of the other important things related to this poem, TINTERN ABBEY. He says that Wordsworth himself gave us the complete title of the poem. For the sake of brevity, we use only the title TINTERN ABBEY, which I've also used as the title of the poem here. But the full complete title is Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798. So he gives you the exact date also, but he also tells you important things. He says on revisiting the banks of the Wye. So this is not Wordsworth's first visit to this place, it is his second visit to the place. After the first visit, he did not write any poetry, but upon visiting it the second time, he composed these lines. And as I've just told you, it was published as the last poem of the lyrical ballads. And at that time, Wordsworth was with his sister, whom he refers to as a friend throughout the poem. And in the first visit, he has visited this place alone. And he was 23 years of age at that time. And it was 5 years back. So in a way, the poem is a recollection of his visit in 1793, which he visited alone. So he recollects all his previous moments. He recollects all the previous moments of his first visit to Tintern Abbey, and he pens them down for us here. And he compares the feelings upon his first visit to the feelings upon his second visit. and he explores his relationship with nature. So the abbey itself is not described in the poem, but River Wye is described passionately. In fact, he calls it a spirit. The poem itself is complex. It is not as simple as his shorter poem, The Solitary Reaper. He addresses a lot of themes here, some of them the same as they were in The Solitary Reaper, but some maybe more infused, more passionate. Some of the themes are memory, again the theme of memory, the theme of recollection, mortality and immortality, faith in nature and relationship with nature, friendship and familial love, because he talks about his relationship, strong relationship with his own sister Dorothy. In the poem you will see that he employs a more intellectual and philosophical approach. He is describing his deepening relationship with nature. So it's going to be more intellectual and it is going to be more philosophical, because it is going to be more endearing and more enduring. And that is why the structure of the poem is complex. There is no rhyme. There's no regular division of stanzas as it was in The Solitary Reaper. But it is written in blank verse, or as I explained to you earlier on, in iambic pentameter, the verse line which is used most appropriately, most famously by the epic writers. And this is a pattern of unstressed, stressed syllables, 5 unstressed syllables and 5 stressed syllables. The poetic devices that he uses are repetitions of sounds and repetitions of words. Let's now begin with the poem, and I will look at briefly, I will look at deeply what Wordsworth is trying to explore here. I will read out the first 4 lines for you first. So let's start with the poem, please. Wordsworth says, 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a sweet inland murmur. I have highlighted the word 5 for you. You see he uses it 3 times to emphasize. And to emphasize what? You can see that this is a repetition of this word 5, and he's trying to emphasize and his longing. He's trying to emphasize his separation from this place and his longing, and his delight at being back here. And you see he is using the personal pronoun as he used in the previous poem, The Solitary Reaper. He says, again I hear. So I hear, again I hear, again also emphasizes his return, his pleasure at being here once again. And then he mentions to you the first natural object, and the first is the waters. He's talking about the springs, the mountain springs, which are flowing with a sweet, as he calls them, with a sweet murmur, with a sweet soft sound. But he gives it a word, murmur, as if it is talking. Murmuring is like talking softly and indistinguishably. So the stream, the water stream, seems to be speaking to Wordsworth or saying something to Wordsworth. In the next lines, once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a while secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. He again emphasizes, he says, once again do I behold. He feels happy to be here once again. He says, I'm happy, filled with joy to be able to behold, to be able to see these steep and lofty cliffs. This is the second object, natural object that he mentions. He is happy to behold, to see the steep and lofty, the huge cliffs surrounding this place. And then he describes the scene as a wild scene and a secluded scene. Wild and secluded, because later on he's going to mention there are trees, there are shrubs, there are hedges which are not trimmed regularly. The grass has grown. It has not grown in patches in different places. It has not been kept, cropped neatly. But he says, this scene impresses thoughts of deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. He feels as everything is one here. So you see, he's taking us towards this deeper understanding with nature. He says that these cliffs, they seem to connect this world, this earth, to the sky. They are tall, the cliffs are tall, and he says that they act as binding the earth to the sky. So the whole scene, the whole natural scene appears to be one great spirit. Then he says, the day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Now he further describes some other natural objects. He says there is this dark sycamore, this huge tree which has got a dark shade underneath. And he says, while I lie under this huge tree with its branches spread and view the scene before me, and the scene he describes to you as there are plots of cottage ground, meaning there are gardens, there are small gardens, and he sees orchard tufts, he sees small groups of fruit trees which are full of unripe fruits at this time of the year. And everything is green, he says, everything clad in one green hue. Again, this is significant, although I've not highlighted it, but he says all is clad means covered. He says all is clad in one green hue. So everything is green here, and everything is in one shade of green. And they all lose themselves with groves and copses. Groves and copses, these are forests and thickets of small trees and shrubs. So again you see there is this unity, there is this idea of oneness. Everything appears to be the one, to be the same for him. Then he says, once again. You see, he keeps on repeating. He is so happy to be back here again that he says he's happily repeating again and again that he is back here. Once again, he says, once again I see these hedgerows. Hardly hedgerows. Little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral forms green to the very door. So he says, once again I'm lucky, I'm happy to behold, to see these hedgerows. These are small hedgerows, but these are not the neatly kept hedgerows that we have outside our houses, which are looked after by the gardener. He's talking about hedgerows, he says, which are run wild, which are not kept cropped neatly, and they have grown in all directions. So he says, once again I see these wild hedgerows, and I see these pastoral farms, and again they are all green to the very door. So pastoral farms, this is a reference to the sheep farms that we have in the rural areas. Then the next things that he mentions are wreaths of smoke. He says, and wreaths of smoke, curls of smoke, sent up in silence from among the trees. Everything here is silent. Smoke is rising in silence from among the trees. He cannot see those cottages, he cannot see those houses, but he sees wreaths of smoke rising from above the treetops, with some uncertain notice as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave where by his fire his hermit sits alone. So Wordsworth is actually happy because he sees that someone is living here. He talks about the vagrant dwellers, or he talks about a hermit. Vagrant dwellers are the vagabonds, people who have no fixed place to live, and they move from place to place wherever they find some shade or food or water. So he says maybe it's some vagrant dweller who is living in these woods, and the smoke is rising from their small makeshift cottage. Or he says it is there is some hermit who lives in his cave. You know that hermits are people who have left the material world, who have who become part of the natural world, and because they feel that it is pure and it is connected to the spirit of the world. It is connected to the divine. So he says, maybe there is a hermit who lives in his cave by his fire, alone, meditating, in meditation. This is significant, this is important, because the reference to the hermit, I mean, because later on you will see that Wordsworth talks about a mystic's experience, and he talks about the effect of meditation of a hermit. And because as Wordsworth as a hermit maybe experienced it himself as he sat embedded in nature, and he meditated on nature. He further says, he calls all these natural objects, these beauteous forms, and this phrase is significant. He says, these beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. So he emphasizes his bond with nature. He says that although I was absent from here, although I could not see it. I could not see it with my natural eye, because he could only look back on these moments, on this place, from his memory. He says, but these beauteous forms were not absent from my mind, although they were absent from physical view. So, in other words, he's trying to say that he did not forget this beautiful scene when he was in the city. Now we come to the second part, which maybe in your books appears to be the second stanza, although it is not exactly a stanza, but it is because he is going to talk about, start a different subject matter here. Up till here he was describing the scene upon his revisit, upon his second visit, and he was constantly comparing it with the feeling that it aroused in him on his first visit. Now he's going to compare the effect of this beautiful scene on him when he was in the city, and how it brought him joy and peace there. So he's talking about the time period between his first visit and his second visit, which was spent in the city, and how he took sustenance from his experience with nature. So he says, but oft means often, but often in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensation sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Now these are some serious lines, and so you need to pay attention to them. He says that when I was in the middle of my life in town and cities, I have owed. He owes something to nature. He feels indebted to nature. He feels that nature gave him something, and he is thankful, he's grateful to nature for this. He said whenever he felt wearied, whenever he felt tired, whenever he felt distressed, whenever he felt saddened by the burdens of the town and the city, he felt, and I have highlighted the phrase for you, he says sensations sweet, sensations or feelings. There were sweet feelings when he remembered nature and natural beauty. He was filled with this sweet feeling. It's just like it is with everyone else, with each one of us, when we are dejected and when we are tired and we are saddened by something. We always search in our memories for something happy, for someone who had made us happy. And that memory sometimes, not sometimes, that memory always takes us out of that feeling of depression and sadness. The same is the case with Wordsworth. He feels that in those lonely times when he was in the city, the memory of nature gave him sweet feelings, and then gave him sweet feelings, and it also restored. He says, I was restored with tranquility. So the weariness, the tension, the sadness, they all passed away, and tranquility was restored. So this feeling, this beautiful feeling that the memory of nature arouses in him, returns his tranquility, returns his peace for him. This is an important development in the relationship, in Wordsworth's relationship with nature, that nature is a source of solace, it is a source of tranquility, it is a source of happiness, it is a source of peace. And but Wordsworth here describes to you a process. He says, felt in the blood, felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind. So from the blood, first he feels something stirring in the blood, it is taken to the heart, and from the heart, he says, they move into my purer mind. So the whole body responds to this sweet feeling. So the effect is on the whole body, on the heart as well as the mind. So the whole body is relaxed. The mind and the heart both are at rest, both are at peace when he recollects those beautiful moments that he spent among nature. Wordsworth further elaborates. He says, and feelings too of unremembered pleasure. And then what are those unremembered pleasures? He says, first he was talking about those feelings which he remembered, feelings, the sweet sensations that nature aroused in him, the time that he spent among nature. Those were that he could recollect clearly, that he could remember clearly. But then he says there were also feelings which were unremembered, but that also gave him pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. So he's showing more gratitude. He's telling us in detail what is it exactly that he owes to nature, to this memory of this beautiful scene. And he says that it has made him a better person. So the influence of nature, the influence of his relationship with nature is that it cultivates character, it builds character, it helps us become good person. So Wordsworth is giving his moral doctrine here, which is that nature improves character. So even the little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love, he says, I owe those to nature. So all that he does, all goodness that he thinks was ever part of him, was because of nature. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. Now he says, nor less, I trust, to them I have owed another gift. So one gift was sweet sensation and feeling and restored tranquility. The first gift was how nature helps restore balance, restore happiness, tranquility, peace of mind, peace of heart, peace of mind, and how it improves character, how it helps us become better individuals. That was nature's first gift on Wordsworth. He says the second gift is of more sublime aspect. It is more sublime. He says it is the blessed mood. Please remember this. He says it is that blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. He calls the world unintelligible, because poet says, I cannot understand this world. He was a great, if you remember, I told you earlier on that he was a great supporter of the French Revolution. Most of the Romantic poets were. They all supported freedom, liberation, wherever it was. He was also, along with Coleridge, they supported the revolutionaries who stood against the monarchy in France. But later on he was disappointed, like everybody else, with those revolutionaries, because one of the revolutionary, Napoleon Bonaparte, after he threw aside the monarchy, he himself became the despotic ruler. So the Republican government that they had sought, that the whole dream that was shattered. So the Romantics also felt disappointed, they felt disillusioned, and so this is why maybe Wordsworth says that I cannot understand this world. It is unintelligible for me. I cannot understand how it works. So he says, but when I am in that blessed mood, nature gives me the blessed mood, and when I am in that blessed mood, this heavy weight, this heavy and weary weight of this confused world is lightened, it is taken away, and I feel once again relaxed. I feel at peace myself, at peace with myself. I feel that my senses are restored. So he says that maybe you can see that he here is contrasting the world, the material world that we know it, our world with the natural world. And what he's saying is that the difference between the two is that that world burdens us. It is heavy and it is weary. It has got heavy and a weary weight. It burdens us. But this natural world or nature, it does not burden us. It lightens us. It relaxes us. It soothes us. It gives us serenity. It gives us peace. So this is Wordsworth's deepening relationship with nature that he's seeking to explain through this poem here. He's going to further explain to you how this blessed mood leads him on, and eventually it leads him to look into the mystery of things. He says, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. These lines are important. This is a development of mysticism. This is how Wordsworth, as I mentioned to you earlier on, when he mentioned towards the end of the first part, he talks about a hermit. He is now connecting the hermits, connecting and explaining to you how a hermit meditates once he is surrounded with nature, and to what does this meditation lead him. He says, when all the worries, all the miseries of the world are forgotten under the effect of nature. So nature, when nature has restored harmony, when nature has restored tranquility in us by its beautiful scenes, by its beautiful effect, and we are in a blessed mood, but then what happens? He says, we are gently led on. He says, the process doesn't stop here. He says, we are gently led on, he says, and then a stage comes, because he says, until the next stage is when he says the breath of this frame. Corporeal frame is our physical body. He says, in our physical body, and even the motion of our blood is suspended. It stops. He says, then a stage comes when a mystic, or when someone who is deeply meditating on nature, he feels alienated from his own physical body. He becomes aloof of his body. His breath is almost suspended. He stops breathing. It's not that he actually stops breathing. He's still alive, but he says that he does not have the feeling. He is not conscious of these realities. So he's not conscious that he's breathing. He is not conscious that his blood is flowing through his veins and his heart is beating. And he's not conscious that there are of the different thoughts that may be in his mind. His focus is elsewhere. It's taken away from his physical body and all that the body is part of, the heart and the mind. The focus is shifted from all of this, and he says we are laid asleep in body, and when this happens, that is when we laid asleep in body, and it actually happens when we are asleep, we are unaware that we are breathing, we are unaware that our blood is running through our veins, we are unaware that our heart is beating, we are unaware of what our mind may be, what may be going through our minds at that time. So he says our body, physical body is laid asleep, but the eye of the soul awakens. The soul awakens. So the focus shifts from the external to the internal, and the external body becomes dead, but the internal becomes living. And this is a process of a mystic, and this is a deepening relationship that the poet shares with nature, and he believes that this is where nature leads one to. When concluding this discussion, he says, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Then he describes to us the further stages in this mystic experience. And what are they? He says, with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony, this eye which is made quiet, this is the external eye, the eye through which we see the external reality, through which you see me and I can see things before me. He says this is made quiet. The eye cannot is looking, but it is not looking at the external objects. It is made quiet by the power of harmony and by the power of joy. He says the mystic is able to look inwards, is able to give life to his soul, because he has achieved harmony. He has achieved harmony with nature. He has achieved harmony with the spirit of the nature. And as a result of which, he feels a deepening joy. He leaves this world, this physical temporal world, this physical sensuous world, and he's united with the spirit of the world, and he is filled with immense joy. And he says, under these two effects, we see into the life of things. He says, we attain a spiritual status. So through this process, the poet Wordsworth becomes a mystic Wordsworth. So he's no longer a poet who's objectively looking at nature. He's no longer a poet who is taking only outward external pleasure, taking pleasures, joys in the outward beauty of nature. He becomes a mystic now. He's looking at the beneficial effects of nature on him, and through those effects on him, he feels that he is connected to the spirit of the nature, and he is filled with extreme joy. And once he feels that he's connected with that spirit of nature, he feels that the whole burden of this unintelligible world is lightened. He can now understand the world. He can now solve the mysteries of the world. He feels that he has power to overcome any great calamity. Such is the power of nature that Wordsworth is describing to us here. And I think it is, as Muslims, it is easier for us to connect to this description that Wordsworth gives us here, because this is truly a mystical experience. This is an experience of a mystic, how he wants to connect to the reality of this world, to the reality of this universe, to the divine, and is so filled up with extreme joy that he himself feels powerful. He feels that he can resolve mysteries, and in fact he attains a spiritual status from where all things worldly appear trivial, appear secondary to him, and the only great pleasure, the primary pleasure, is oneness with the divine, is oneness with the ultimate reality, is oneness with the ultimate truth. For Wordsworth, this ultimate truth, this ultimate reality, this ultimate love is nature. And as we shall see later, he talks about a presence, a spirit of nature. So it is to that he is leading us on to. Okay, then Wordsworth says, and I'll read the lines for you. He says, "Yet oh, how oft, in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir, unprofitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart." Now he is taking us back to his days that he spent in city life. He's talking about his feeling of misery, his feeling of being at a loss there when he was surrounded by the problems in the city. He says, "Oh, how often when I was in darkness, when I was surrounded with many shapes of joyless daylight." First he talks about darkness, then he's talking about daylight, which is also joyless, meaning which is also dark, which is also like night. And then he says, "When the fretful stir, unprofitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart." So when the fretful stir, when the motions, when the obsessions of this world, which is unprofitable, which have no gain, which have no benefit, and it's like an obsession with us. We all want to become more and more rich. We all want to join in the race for materialism. So he's tired of all this obsession of the materialistic world. He says, "When I felt low and when I was burdened by these miseries, I looked to you. I looked for these beautiful scenes in my memory, and I felt rejoiced, and I felt restored in peace and restored to peace and tranquility." Because he says in the next lines, "How often in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan, why?" So when the pressure of the world was too much for him, he says, "I turned to thee, O sylvan, why." Now he's talking about this is the Wye river. He's called it sylvan. Sylvan is it's a word in Greek myth which is used for the spirits. So he says, "Oh, why you are a spirit." So it's not an ordinary river. It's not just a natural object, an ordinary natural object, but it is a spirit. It has a spirit of its own. He says, "You wander through the woods." He says, "But my spirit longed for you. When I was absent from here, I longed for you. I longed to be here, and I longed to sit beside you, and I longed to rejoice in these scenes once again." So River Wye is also a source of inspiration for the poet, and is a source of meaning to life for Wordsworth. He says, and now, what has happened now? Wordsworth is bringing us back from flashback, he's bringing us back to the real, to his second visit now. He was, in the first part, remember he described to you how he's the scene before, how he how he saw the scene before him again, in all its natural beauty. And then in the next part, he talked about how he felt when he was away from this place in the city life, but yet again, although he was away, nature still had blessed him with some things. He talks about those influences of nature when he was in the city away from this beautiful natural scene. He's now bringing us back to the present, and he says, and now with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. He says, now on this second visit, my memories are revived again. Some memories may be dim, some may be faint, some are half extinguished, some may be sad, some may be joy, but he says, my mind is revived again. My mind is fully revived again. So once again, he's preparing us to take us back in time, to take us back to his first visit, or maybe to take us back to his previous association with nature. Because he says, my mind has revived again. While here, then he says, while here I stand, not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with the pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. He says, while I stand here, I don't stand here because I feel pleasure only at this moment, because he says, uses a phrase, present pleasure. He says, I have a sense of present pleasure. I derive pleasure by looking at this beautiful scene again. But I am also happy and grateful because in this moment there is life and food for future years. So nature, it becomes a source of pleasure for not just for the present but also for the future. So you see what Wordsworth is doing here, just like I explained to you in the previous poem in Solitary Reaper, how he connects the past, the present and the future, and they're all one for him. He does not put them in separate compartments. He says, nature was a source of pleasure in the past, nature is a source of pleasure in the present, but nature will also be the source of pleasure in the future, because he says, in the present moment there is life and food for future years. So again, so when I visit this place again, it is going to give me food for the next, for my next life. And so I dare to hope. So this is what he hopes. So this is what he wishes. This is what he prays for. That in future also he will gain pleasure from this visit, from this second visit. That in future also he will feel pleasure when he looks back at this visit again. Though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills. Now begins his flashback again. He's again going to take us back in time. He's going to tell us how he felt when he visited this place in the past. Okay, so he says, I have changed no doubt. Let me first read out the lines for you and then I will explain. He says, though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, where like a roe I bounded over the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams wherever nature led. Although, he says, I have changed a lot from what I was when I came here the previous time. He says, when I first came among these hills, when I first came here, I was like a roe. A roe is a deer, a young deer. He says, and you know that the deers can run fast. They have slim, slender legs. They can run fast, and it's a heron. It can run fast and it can climb steep cliffs, steep mountains. It can stand on the edges of cliffs and rocks. They're fearless also when they are amongst nature. But it says, I was like a roe. I bounded over the mountains. I climbed mountains. I ran by the sides of the rivers. and by the sides of the lonely streams, wherever nature led. He said, without thinking what I was doing, without taking anything, any food for thought, I followed nature. I followed nature everywhere, and I went wherever it would lead me. I went to the hills, I went to the mountains, I swam in the deep rivers, I crossed those streams, and so he says he was part of nature, but without any conscious thought. More like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. He says, at that time I was like someone who's always flying for someone he dreads. So he says, my relationship with nature then was more like I was afraid. I was afraid to recognize something in nature. I was afraid to understand maybe this, the influence of nature on me. So I was running away. I was running away from its influence, and rather than like someone who seeks the thing he loves, rather than running towards nature, towards an understanding of nature, I was running away from that influence of nature. So nature sometimes, he says, in those times fill him with fear also. He does talk about these things in detail in his another poem, the Immortality Ode. You must have studied it sometime in your past. It is part of the bachelor's course also. In your Immortality Ode, Wordsworth talks about of his childhood experiences of running away from nature when he felt someone following him, and whenever he committed some serious sin against nature. So maybe you can go back to Immortality Ode and reconnect what he's trying to say here. And he says further on, for nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. So in the past, what was nature to him? It was a coarser pleasure of his boyish days. He says those were unconscious, crude and rough pleasures of my boyish, he calls them, young adulthood days. But he says nature then to me was all in all. It was all in all, meaning it was, as he will describe in the next few lines, what he means by all in all. He says nature for me was a passion, nature for me was a feeling, nature for me was an emotion. It filled up my emotional needs. It was a source of filling up my emotional needs. And he said, but it was also an appetite for me. It also filled up my physical needs. It also satisfied my physical desires. So this is what he means when he says nature was to me all in all. He will describe this to you in the next lines, as he says, I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and glooming wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite. He says, I cannot explain my previous days clearly, but he says everything to me about everything about nature was a passion for me. The sounding cataract are the waterfalls, he says, the sound of the falling water. It haunted me. The tall rocks, the mountains, the deep and the gloomy woods. Again, gloomy means sad and lonely. Their colors, their forms, he says, everything, he says, gave me a passion and was an appetite for me. It's they supplied him with emotional as well as the physical they satisfied his emotional as well as his physical needs. So he says, but important thing to note here is that he says, in those days, it was the outer external beauty of nature that attracted him, because he's talking to you and he's explaining to you here the external natural beauty of nature. He's talking about the cataract, he's talking about rocks, mountains, the woods, their colors and their forms. So all the external beauties of nature, he says, they attracted him. They attracted him. So it was the pleasure that he derived from nature then was more sensuous, not thoughtful, not related to the thinking or the mental processes, but it was more sensuous. He enjoyed the beautiful scenes. He took pleasure from it. They supplied his emotional and the physical needs, and that was all. So there was no deepening relationship, no deepening intellectual, spiritual relationship with nature that grew later on. He further says, a feeling and a love that had no need of remoter charm by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. So he explains it here now. He says, this was a feeling, and this was a love. This was a feeling for nature, this was a love for nature, which was not supplied by thought, which had nothing to do with thought, which was not a conscious attempt to understand, to admire nature, not just for its external source of pleasure, but also for something else, for something deeper. So it was only all that had been borrowed from the eye, nothing that was unborrowed from the eye. So he was only emotionally attached to nature and had no deeper relationship with nature. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more. He says that time has now gone. Those days when when nature was only a source of physical pleasure to me, he says those days are gone now. He's no longer the same Wordsworth. He's a changed man now. He has moved on from those coarser pleasures, and he has acquired a deepening and a more serious intellectual, a more serious philosophical relationship with nature. He says, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures, they are no more. The aching joys and the dizzying raptures, when he used to run amongst the wild fields, when he used to climb the mountains in a happy state of mind, he says, they are now no more. Not for this faint eye, nor moan, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe abundant recompense. Now, do you think Wordsworth is regretting this change in him? This change from old Wordsworth to the new Wordsworth? He tells you clearly here, he says, no, I don't mourn. I don't mourn that loss. I don't regret that I have matured. I don't regret that my past relationship with nature has now has moved a step further. He does not have regrets, because the reason is, he says, there are other gifts. Other gifts have followed. So he says, nature, as he will tell us later on, nature does not betray the heart that loves her. This is what he is emphasizing here. Nature is always there for a person. It's always there. It is always a support in one's life. So in his days of youth, it was another kind of support, and now in his adulthood, it's another kind of support, but it is always there. He says, and that he calls abundant recompense. He says that there's plenty of compensation. So what nature has given him now to maturer Wordsworth is plenty, is a lot more than what he had back then. So he has no regrets. He doesn't have any, he doesn't mourn the loss, that previous loss. He says in the next lines, for I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes as the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. So what are those abundant recompense? What is it? He says, I now look at nature, not as a thoughtless youth, he says, but here, and these lines are important, please, they're very important in fact, because his new relationship, he's describing his new relationship with nature to you here. He says he hears oftentimes the still sad music of humanity. Nature connects him with his fellow mankind. Nature does not segregates him. Nature does not make him forgetful of his fellow human beings. Nature does not make him selfish. Nature does not make him proud. But nature makes him all the opposite. Nature makes him humble. Nature makes him think about the other's problems, not only centering about his own problems, about his own isolation and about his own troubles, but it connects him, helps him connect to the rest of the humanity. So he says, when I am in nature, I am not disconnected with the rest of the mankind. He says, I can hear the sad music of humanity. I can see their problems. I can understand them. And he says, I feel connected to my fellow human beings. Nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and to subdue. The meanings of the words are given here. These words are given here for you. But this statement that he makes is a philosophical statement. In philosophy, we struggle to find a relationship with other human beings. We try to discern, we try to find out what is it that bonds one human being with the other human being. And when Wordsworth is trying to do it here, and he's giving credit to nature for it, he is suggesting, he's making a statement about his philosophy of nature. Then he is going to take us take us into a deeper analysis. He's going to explain his deeper relationship with nature to us. He says, and I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is a light of the setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. These lines are yet again very important as they describe Wordsworth's pantheism. Wordsworth is most often called a pantheist because he feels a spirit in nature. But I'm going to look at this idea of pantheism more in detail with you after we are done with the textual analysis of the poem. But here I'm only going to refer to it briefly and explain these lines, but a deeper analysis of it later on. So he says, he feels a presence in nature. He feels that there is a moving presence. He feels there is a throbbing presence. And then he says, it disturbs me with the joy, but that disturbance is not that of fear or that of tension, but it is of fear, of joy. Joy of elevated thoughts. He says, when he is in nature, when he feels that presence, the effect of that presence, the effect of that, you may call it divine, you may call it spiritual, the effect of that presence on him is that his thoughts become elevated, and that he has he develops a sublime sense. And he says, when all of this happens, I feel that that nature is interfused with some spirit that surrounds us, that is surrounding us, that is everywhere, that is above us, that is below us, that is underneath us, that is in the air around us, that is everywhere. The whole place is filled up with this with His presence. Because He says whose dwelling or His place of living is where? He says it is the light of the setting suns. So where do you find His presence? You find it in the evening times when the sun is setting. And the round ocean, when you are looking out at the ocean, when you breathe in the air, when you look at the blue sky, and it's inside the mind of the man. So the whole place, the whole universe, according to Wordsworth, is filled up with this presence which gives him elevated thoughts and a sublime sense. It is everywhere. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. He says, it is like a motion. It moves, and it is a spirit. First he called it a presence, now he's calling it a spirit. He says, he doesn't, please notice, he doesn't use the word God for it. He calls it a spirit. He calls it a presence. He is not being religious here. He is he is simply describing to you the effect of nature on him. And when he describes that effect on him as an individual, as a human being, he says it is not possible that something that is inanimate, objects that are inanimate, like the trees, like the rocks, the sky, that do not breathe, how can they influence influence human being and cause elevated thoughts or sense sublime? So he says that these are not inanimate objects. These are not objects who have no life in them. They have life. There is a spirit that rolls through all of them. As he says, that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Look at the repetition of all, and all. It is everywhere, he says, connecting everything, binding everything, surrounding everything, filling up everything. It surrounds the whole universe, knits the whole universe together, connects the whole universe together. So he says, the spirit is everything. It links the humans to the rest of the universe, to the rest of the world. So these lines form the basis of Wordsworth's idea of pantheism, where he feels that the objects of nature are bestowed with the spirit of their own. And then he says, therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world, of eye, a ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense. So he says, he's telling us how, he says, he moved from the sensual pleasures to a more thoughtful and philosophical relationship with nature. And he's telling us, this is why I am still a lover of the meadows. He says, I have not stopped loving nature in my previous ways. He says, I am still the same lover of the meadows, of those unkept gardens, of the woods, of the mountains, of all that we see in this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, and both what they can make us see and what they don't. He says, well, but I am at the same time pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart, and soul of all my moral being. Wordsworth concludes this part with a description of nature as having different roles. So nature now adopts different roles when it influences us at different times of our lives. So it's because nature is everywhere. Nature is part of us. Nature never leaves us in distress. So nature is that powerful deity which always knows what we are going through, he says. So it has different roles. Sometimes it becomes the anchor of my purest thoughts. It is my support. Sometimes it is my support, he says. It calls it the anchor of my purest thoughts, of my pure ideas, of my pure thoughts. And at other times it becomes a nurse. Nature at other times is the nurse. And you know that the function of a nurse is to look after those who are diseased, those who are ill, those who are sick, to look after them, to give them food, to nourish them. So this is the task of the nature. And he says another role of nature is that of a guide. Nature is a guide, is our guide. It leads us through the different parts of this world, intertwining parts of this world, through the complexities of the world. Then it is a guardian of my heart. He said it guards my heart, it protects my heart from becoming filthy, from becoming contaminated. So it guards my heart. And in the end he says it is the soul of all my moral being. He says I am nothing without it. I am no one without it. Again, this is a mystic experience, please. This is the mystic Wordsworth who's speaking again. He says, nature is the soul of all my moral being. He says, nature is everything and I am nothing. So again, his own self, his own physical self is negated here, and his soul assumes importance, and he says it's not his soul but it is nature which takes over. So we see here, up till here in fact, we have seen how his thoughtless relationship with nature has developed into a more thoughtful, into a more philosophical, into a more spiritual, deepening relationship with nature. As a young man, he found coarser joys in nature. He found the external beauty of nature as a soul moving factor. But then as he started to understand the language of nature, as he started to spend more time with nature, as he started to open up to the influence of nature, he says that he was able to see all those different shades, all those different roles of nature. And this is the beginning of his intellectual and his spiritual relationship with nature. And he has, up to these lines, expounded his philosophy of nature. He's expounded his relationship with nature. He's expounded his spiritual relationship with nature. He has expounded his intellectual relationship with nature. He's shown us how nature does not alienate us from the rest of the mankind. He's shown us how nature does not separate us from the rest of the universe. He says that it links us to the universe. It links us to the whole mankind. So he says he is giving us that concept of unity, that concept of oneness that a mystic shares. And it is through unity, through oneness with nature, that Wordsworth feels that we are able to get rid of the burden of this world. We are able to set aside our differences. We are able to clear away the corruptions of our soul, and as a result of which we can feel lightened, we feel happy, we feel tranquil, we feel as if our soul has become pure now.